Welcome to Refuting Fine-Tuning, Part 2. If you haven't seen Part 1, you'll find it linked in the video description. To recap, the fine-tuning argument for the existence of God states that many aspects of life and the universe appear to be finely tuned to an astonishing degree. To such a degree, in fact, that the best explanation is some kind of intelligence that wanted to create a universe with embodied conscious agents, such as us. In Part 1, we covered 3 of the 6 problems I see with this argument: the theological problem, the statistical problem, and the philosophical problem. In this video, we're going to cover the 3 remaining problems, starting with what I'm calling the life problem. The fine-tuning argument doesn't just assert that the universe is designed, but that it was designed specifically for life. Now, it's true that if you take this universe and this type of life and mess with it a bit, it all falls apart. Just like if you take a frozen puddle in a hole and then change the hole, it doesn't fit anymore. But so what? It's easy to break something once it's settled in place, but that doesn't mean it was originally fine-tuned, or that this was the only way it could have happened. Now, before we go any further, let me first play devil's advocate on this argument about life, because I think my side of the debate often mistakes a technicality of language for a beat-down gotcha argument. I've heard it argued, by people I otherwise agree with, that the claim of our universe being fine-tuned for life implies that the universe was built around life as we know it, which would mean that life as we know it must be the only way for life to exist, which flies in the face of an omnipotent designer God. I think this is simply a linguistic technicality. A theist could just as easily have said that life was fine-tuned for the universe, or, perhaps more clearly, life and the universe were fine-tuned for each other, and that would seem to remove the problem. I think this rephrased claim does get around the idea of one thing being designed for the other, either the universe for life or life for the universe, and the implication that the latter can only exist in one way. As an analogy, if my goal is to design 2 puzzle pieces that fit together, well, I could design them such that their mating edges are both flat lines, which would be a perfectly acceptable solution, or I could design them with a more traditional puzzle piece profile. I didn't necessarily design one for the other, or vice versa, nor am I locked into designing around the first one I happen to think of. Thus, I think it's unfair to suggest that the term fine-tuned for life is necessarily pigeonholing the designer into working with just one kind of life. This seems to be just a technicality of language. Of course, we would be well within our rights to ask why a designer would bother doing that in the first place. Why would a designer make a universe so precariously balanced if it's supposed to be designed for life? There should be no need for tuning at all, like with our puzzle piece analogy. This does not seem like something an intelligent being would do if the universe was simply a means to an end, i.e., us. If you want to claim that the universe looks purpose-built, well, the only obvious purpose would be aesthetics, certainly not life. So with that understood, let's examine the claim that the universe is not just designed, but that it is designed specifically for life, or life for the universe, whatever. This claim always seemed strange to me. It always seemed strange that Christians could look at a universe that's mostly empty space, with billions of black holes and billions of galaxies, where virtually every location within said universe would kill them, and conclude that the universe was designed for life. I mean, heck, our own planet isn't very well designed for life. The only hospitable part of it is the onion skin on its outer surface, and even this skin isn't very nice to us. What's more, the only natural structure we can live on is a sphere, which has the lowest surface area to volume ratio of any 3D shape. It is literally the least efficient shape you could use. In fact, here's a scale cross-section of the Earth, showing the thickness of the crust compared to the diameter of the entire planet. It takes all this mass just to create a small habitable volume, not to mention a star, a stabilizing moon, and a magnetic field to protect life from the very star that sustains it. That's a lot of duct tape for a divine design. A designed universe would not be so needlessly complicated and inefficient. If you're going to infer some kind of intention behind the universe, then I would say that the most reasonable conclusion is that the designer really loves black holes. Honestly, he probably just loves watching things get sucked into him. I know I would. This seems like a much more reasonable conclusion than the universe being designed for life. A universe designed for life would look a bit more like Minecraft, wouldn't you think? Primarily flat land, not much extra stuff needed to support it, no vast stretches of empty space, no black holes, no meteorites, no extra galaxies, no naturally occurring death beams. I mean, the list is nearly as big as the universe. I look at our universe and our place within it, and I think, wow, we're just barely hanging on by a thread in this tiny little corner. Were the universe not so mind-bogglingly big, both in size and age, I wouldn't be surprised if there was no life at all. Put simply, the universe does not give the appearance of being fine-tuned for life. Rather, life appears to be barely adapted for this particular time and place within the universe. If we believe that the universe was fine-tuned for our specific kind of life, then it would also seem reasonable to believe that the fine-tuner was a 3-year-old child who cobbled together something vaguely similar to what an adult would have done. In short, I don't think there's anything about the universe's relation to life that naturally suggests that it was orchestrated by a powerful intelligence like the one Christians describe. In fact, it looks like quite the opposite. Now, of course, if you already believe in such a being, you can invent all sorts of rationalizations for these apparent inconsistencies, and that's perfectly fine, but you will not convince anyone with this kind of ad hoc reasoning. And why not? Well, because if supernatural things are fair game, well, you could theoretically rationalize anything, no matter how ridiculous it is. I mean, I could argue that Barney the dinosaur is an all-powerful shaman who wants everyone to be eating grilled cheese all the time, despite the fact that we're not currently eating grilled cheese. When someone points this out to me and asks how this Barney shaman could exist given the circumstances, I could come up with ad hoc reason after ad hoc reason for why we're not all eating grilled cheese right now, and why he chose a children's TV show to accomplish his goal. I could even make my web of rationalizations sound reasonably coherent, but no one is going to buy into it. Circumstances themselves do not suggest a Barney the dinosaur shaman or a designer god.
Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but I can explain all of that. I know you can explain all. So can I. It's not hard to come up with ex post facto justifications for why God would have done it that way. Why is it not hard? Because theism is not well defined.
So, to return to my main point, I think anyone who believes that the universe is fine-tuned for life has simply not considered what a universe would actually look like if it were fine-tuned in this way. It's simply a failure of imagination to conclude that the universe, as it exists, was fine-tuned for us. There are many ways in which our relationship to the universe falls short of what we would expect from a designer. But, they say, the universe is fine-tuned for matter and energy and space-time to exist, and without this fine-tuning, you can't have intelligent life at all. Maybe this is the most efficient way that it's possible for intelligent life to exist. The problem with this assertion is that Christianity itself says that it's false. How? Angels. If you believe in angels, then you believe that intelligent beings can exist without matter, energy, or space-time. I mean, heck, God himself is supposedly an intelligent being. He doesn't need these things. He doesn't need a universe to exist. If Christianity is true, then it undercuts its own argument. You don't need a universe in order to have intelligent beings. And as it turns out, you don't even need to be a supernatural Superman in order to invent a stable universe with matter, energy, space-time, and even life. As it turns out, it is mathematically possible that a universe like ours could exist under different conditions, specifically with no weak nuclear force, which was demonstrated by this paper published in 2006. Changing just one parameter of the universe may well be catastrophic, but changing multiple parameters at the same time could lead to a stable universe like ours that has no weak nuclear force. So, the claim that our universe is uniquely fine-tuned is actually demonstrably false, even if we start from the same basic forces that describe our current universe, which, as I understand it, may not even need to be the case. Those are just what we have to work with within our current universe. But could there be more universes? One common objection to the fine-tuning argument is the multiverse hypothesis, which is the real but unproven idea in physics that there are many other universes with different properties, most of which may not have given rise to life. Therefore, the argument goes, it's no wonder that we're here. Given enough universes, life would be inevitable. The most common objection to the multiverse answer is what's called the Boltzmann brain problem, which roughly states that if there really are so many alternate universes, then statistically speaking, the most likely way for intelligence to emerge would be a random decrease in entropy that, on occasion, randomly assembled a fully functional brain, or brain-like structure. This would be a Boltzmann brain. Statistically speaking, the argument goes, if the multiverse hypothesis were true, then we should all be Boltzmann brains. But we're not. Therefore, no multiverse.
Appeal to an observer's self-selection effect accomplishes nothing because there's no reason whatever to think that most observable worlds, or the most probable observable worlds, are worlds in which that kind of observer exists. Indeed, the opposite appears to be true. Most observable worlds will be Boltzmann brain worlds. Since we are presumably not Boltzmann brains, that fact strongly disconfirms a naturalistic world ensemble or multiverse hypothesis.
And how do we know that we're not Boltzmann brains? Well, because if we did live in a Boltzmann brain universe, then the entropy of the universe would have been higher in the past. However, we know from observation that the entropy of the universe was actually lower in the past. Therefore, we do not exist in this minimum entropy state that a Boltzmann brain would occupy. Therefore, we are not Boltzmann brains. Therefore, no multiverse, right? Actually, no. This is not really a problem for the multiverse hypothesis. It just tells us which models of the multiverse are viable and which ones are not, as physicist Sean Carroll explains.
There's an obvious and easy naturalistic explanation in the form of the cosmological multiverse. People like to worry about the multiverse. It sounds extravagant. I claim the multiverse is amazingly simple. It is not a theory. It is the prediction of physical theories that are themselves quite elegant, small, and self-contained that create universe after universes. There's no reason, no right that we have to expect that the whole entire universe looks like the conditions we have right now. But more importantly, if you take the multiverse as your starting point, you can make predictions. We live in an ensemble, and we should be able to predict the likelihoods that the conditions around us take different forms. So in cosmology papers dealing with the multiverse, you see graphs like this that try to predict the density of dark matter given other conditions in the multiverse. You do not see graphs like this in the theological papers trying to give God credit for explaining the fine-tuning because theism is not well-defined. Now, Dr. Craig makes a lot about the Boltzmann brain problem, the problem that in the multiverse we could just be random fluctuations rather than growing in the aftermath of a hot Big Bang. This is a significant misunderstanding of how the multiverse works. The multiverse doesn't say that everything that can possibly happen happens with equal probability. It says that there's a definite history of the multiverse and you can make predictions. Different multiverse models will have different ratios of ordinary observers to random observers. That's a good thing. That helps us distinguish between viable models of the multiverse and non-viable models. And there are plenty of viable models where the Boltzmann brain or random fluctuations do not dominate.
There are other objections to the multiverse hypothesis. One is that it violates Occam's razor. Proposing an infinite number of universes just to explain our one is certainly not the simplest explanation. Right, and proposing an infinite God is somehow simpler? How does that follow? Even if we don't assume that the designer is infinite right off the bat, just because it's one designer or one God does not necessarily make it a simple idea, any more than one multiverse is a simple idea because it's just one postulation. Arguably, an infinite number of universes is simpler than a creator whose very substance is necessarily divorced from everything we know about physics, but who can somehow affect physics nonetheless, and who wanted to affect physics and who apparently did so with the intention of creating us and having done it in such a way that we would one day discover his handiwork. I don't think Christians who posit God as a simple explanation really appreciate the number of assumptions they're making. One response to this objection, and similar objections about who designed the designer, is that God is ontologically simple, but functionally complex. His nature is simple, even though his thoughts are infinite.
Now, Dawkins goes on to defend the idea that a designer wouldn't be a good explanation because he says the hypothesis of a divine designer is more complex than the world that you're trying to explain. An explanation has to be simpler than the phenomenon you're trying to explain, and he thinks a divine designer is less simple than the world, the universe involving all this complexity. Well, that is completely mistaken. When you reflect on the idea that God is an immaterial entity, a spirit, he is a mind without a body, then God is a remarkably simple entity because he has no parts. There's no composition in God's being. An unembodied mind is an entity that is startlingly simple in its nature. So what Dawkins is obviously confused is a mind's ideas, which may be very complex, with a mind itself, which is a very simple entity.
It's certainly an interesting response, but I'm going to have to leave it for my video on the teleological argument where it's more relevant. For now, let me just float the question, what is a mind if not a collection of thoughts and ideas? Another objection is Alvin Plantinga's poker game analogy.
So there are problems with the multiverse theory, but Alvin Plantinga has noticed something else about it. He has demonstrated in the form of an analogy. It goes like this. Imagine yourself at a poker game. One of the other players is dealing the cards, and for the past 20 hands, he has dealt himself 4 aces each turn. After the last hand, you and the other players get up ready to shoot the guy. But suddenly the dealer says, I know it looks suspicious, guys, but possibly there is an infinite succession of universes, so that for any possible distribution of possible poker hands, there is a universe in which that possibility is realized. We just happen to find ourselves in the one where someone like me always deals himself only aces and wild cards without ever cheating. It could be the case you can't prove I'm cheating. So if you were at the game, how would you respond? Would you sit back down and assume that could be the case and keep playing? Or would you recognize that possibility is exceptionally rare, and it is far more likely the dealer is cheating? That it is far more likely intelligence was used in instituting where the cards are going, and it is not random chance that the aces keep ending up in the dealer's hand. That is exactly the same idea behind the fine-tuning argument.
This is a false analogy because our ability to observe the unlikely hand is not contingent on the hand itself. In Plantinga's analogy, we suspect the dealer because we know from experience that the hand could have been dealt another way, with us still being there to observe it. If, however, there was an infinite number of hands dealt, and the only time we could see the hand was when it was this incredibly unlikely one, well then, we wouldn't really suspect anything, now would we? If our observation were contingent on the specific hand, then the probability of the hand itself might be very low, but the probability of us observing it would be very high. Plantinga simply ignores the contingent nature of our observation when constructing his analogy. As I hope you can see by now, there is simply nothing redeeming about the fine-tuning argument on any level. Not only is it demonstrably false that this universe is uniquely finely tuned, but the argument relies on unknown probabilities, nebulous theology, failure of the imagination, a misunderstanding of the multiverse hypothesis, and a good old-fashioned argument from ignorance. The fine-tuning argument may feel compelling when you first hear it, and I don't fault anyone for buying into it. But when we examine its details, we come up empty-handed. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more.